We are live. Sandra Della Harvest Development Group, and I am joined today by Audrey Roofah, who is the founder and CEO of Mariana Strategies down in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Audrey. How are you down there?
Doing well, holding up, definitely.
Yeah.
Thanks.
How is your move to remote?
Well, you know, the reason why it's been okay is that this isn't my first rodeo. So I've managed remote teams in the past, but definitely not under these circumstances. And so it's been an important time to take stock and reflect on what works, what doesn't work, and just to help other folks get up to speed so that they don't have to make the same mistakes I did when I started managing remote teams.
Yeah, well, we are going to be blessed with hearing what those are and then having you give us good information. I was sharing with my team this morning, we've never been remote in the decade that Harvest has been around. And I am guiltily liking a little bit of it. We're feeling so much more productive. So let me just welcome our viewers. We have these Do Good Better luncheons every weekday at noon. We are bringing some of the leading experts on topics that are probably on your mind right now in these uncertain times. And they're only 30 minutes. Drop in. You can bring your lunch if you want and learn something. We've had a really great week on this. We started out with acknowledging the change. We moved into how to get unstuck with Tom Brush. We talked yesterday with Ann Jin about communication and marketing. And today we're all blessed to have Audrey Roofah here. So I am going to hand this over to Audrey. I know she has a few slides to share, but I encourage everyone to write in your questions. Yesterday we were in a group and we simply asked, what are some of the obstacles and challenges you're facing right now? And we had no less than 3 dozen people come back with really differing concerns. So we're here to answer questions. That's our focus for the next month as we all walk through this together. And we have Audrey with her experience and knowledge expertise. So feel free to ask your questions below or message us through Facebook. Audrey.
Thanks, Sandra, and hi to everyone out there. I'm really glad to be chatting with folks about managing remote teams and what works and how to get things up to speed fast. What I'm going to do is go through a set of some tips that are helpful. I'm going to push some resources through the chat box for folks, things that you can use right away to help with efficiency in this process, but also to take that high level view of adjusting during this period. And I know that's been a topic of conversation too. So from the high level, there are 3 big recommendations that we have for managing remote teams under these circumstances. And the first is to set but also manage expectations. We're going to talk a little bit about that. The second is really wrangling that communications process. So Sandra and I were talking earlier about some of the things we kind of take for granted in a physical workspace that just don't exist anymore now. And so how do we recreate some of the benefits of that? And then also get rid of some of the inefficiencies and difficulties that exist as well. And the third aspect is going to be building resilience in your remote team using some tips and tools around emotional intelligence. So those are big features for today, and something that we're going to start with. Sound good?
Sounds perfect.
Excellent. So our first recommendation, and what I'm going to do is have folks who want to play along at home, I'm going to send through a document in the chat so that anyone can use this. And what we want to be able to do is kind of play along at home. The idea is we have recommendations, and for anyone who finds them useful, you can start writing down your action items to pick and choose the pieces that work. So our first thought here is that we really want to take stock of our team goals and make changes, as we need them. This is a situation that's really fluid, and we need to be able to kind of reflect that in the work that we're doing. If we don't, things slow down and they get to a place where it really is difficult. So I'm going to share with you my screen, some some slides that are useful. Let me know if you don't see them. I'm taking that as a you see them. Yeah, great. And what we're doing is we're reviewing, we're assessing, and we're communicating those changes, right? At the team level, at the organization level, depending on where you are, and then have the folks on your team do the same, right? Part of this process is making sure that they're able to recalibrate and that you're communicating about these. Next, and items in orange reflect emotional intelligence components of our discussion, is taking the temperature of your team. I usually start webinars, and if you use Zoom webinars, you have a polling function saying, what's your stress level today? How's the team doing? Just so folks can know that, you know, you're expecting honesty, that you're there for whatever the answer is, and that you're taking people as they come right now. Next is repeating this process for taking stock, assessing, changing, noting that it's going to be iterative right now. And finally, when it comes to the taking stock and making changes, something that folks who are not used to remote work can find a bit challenging, both from being the person working remotely and the person managing remote teams, is that sense of, are my people working? What's going on? They're not here. I can't see them. I don't know what's happening. This is a time to focus on outcomes rather than activities. So supporting your folks to be able to deliver on the work that they need to do, but knowing that you're not going to be able to watch the how in real time. You're not there with them, but helping them get to those outcomes is the deliverables is what we really need to be focusing on right now. If you need to lay out a rule, and this can be useful, you might say, if it's not something you do in the office, don't do it during your work period either, right? Things we do in the office, you know, we go on a coffee break, we go for a walk around the block to clear our heads, right? We make lunch, go out to lunch, right? We expect that to happen during the workday in a work from home setting as well. Maybe what we're not doing is binging television, right? That's not happening during your workday. So being clear about those expectations and saying, you know, you run with it and I'm here to support you.
Yes. So this is so interesting for me because our team of 5 staff just went through this whole process starting last week. And I wish I had met you a week ago because I kind of stumbled through it, but it felt intuitive, exactly what you're saying. Mm-hmm. And I think taking the temperature of the team was probably the icebreaker for us, because it allowed people to say, I'm really scared. I don't know how I'm going to be judged on my work. I've never worked this way before. And we really did focus more on projects. You know, all of our way of working before, as we talked about, was kind of drive-by. We would hear each other, or we would all work together on a you know, task at hand. But right now, it really has fallen in line with what you're saying here. One of the biggest things that we had a problem with, though, is to define the project. So can we just pause for a second, and can you help us understand what you mean when you say take stock of team goals and make changes? What does that look like?
Sure. So there are some underlying assumptions there, right? We're assuming that a team has its strategic plan, and from there it's derived its key performance indicators, goals for a quarter, a year, and what those look like. So if those are in place and they are written down, then you can say, all right, we kind of need to recalibrate depending on what's there. And if that hasn't happened, then now is a good time to be setting those expectations so that you do have some sense of what you're working towards in your as your team is now distributed.
Love it. Great.
Okay. Our second recommendation goes to that point about communications. And this is a real brass tacks item. So you see here, there's an alligator. And my husband likes to say, let's start by dealing with the alligator closest to the boat. So not worried about those faraway alligators. But
I'm stealing that. I love that phrase.
Oh, great. In order to recreate some of the communication structures that are available in person, we need to have a tech infrastructure in place, and then everyone has to be clear about how to use it. That's hardware, it's software, apps. Some people on your team might be more comfortable with a VPN or video conferencing than others. I'm seeing a lot of organizations start up right now with, all right, we're getting that Microsoft Teams subscription, Slack, whatever it is, we need group chat available now. And getting people up to speed is a challenge in itself. So making sure that your team has its tech needs addressed, and then making sure they're comfortable using it. I mentioned Slack and Teams, but I'm agnostic about the technology. I'm just noticing that people are trying to recreate those communication structures, and doing that is a hurdle in itself. Being able to do that is item number one. From there, I would suggest tip number 3 is norms and expectations about communication. So I'm going to push through again in the chat box. I'm going to stop the share for a second to send you another link. And the idea here is that you need to be clear about how you're communicating. What's the best way to reach people? What setups do they have in place and they want to recreate? And then some of the other pieces, like for many people who have family caretaking responsibilities right now, they may not be working 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. every day. They have something that they need to adjust, and you're working with them. So we've created this spreadsheet right here. You can click on the link to see. The idea being that you can articulate with your teams the ways that you want to communicate, the hours that you're communicating, and being able to say that you can reach me this way and this is how we work is an important way of getting up to speed fast.
So Audrey, let me just pause there. We're going to find a way, because on live stream, we can't actually share the link or the product, but we'll find a way to do that. So we'll post Audrey's contact information. And if you want it directly from her, you can email her or messenger through Facebook. But you can also message us here through Facebook, and we'll be happy to download those and get those to you as well.
Excellent. So you've got your norms about communication, and you've articulated them and agreed on them, so that you're not fumbling through, do I expect a response, 12 hours? Is it the next day? Use the tools that you can set up, and you'll see in these handouts we've articulated some of them. And this goes for meetings too. Sandra and I were talking about having efficient meetings and setting up structures, and some of what supports that is identifying what tools you're going to use for that purpose. And video conferencing will get you as close as you can to in person, being able to catch the visual cues that you wouldn't get on the phone, tone that you hear versus something that you would not see in email. So identifying what mechanism you're going to use for meetings, and then identifying the processes. Now is a really good time to make sure that you're sending agendas for meetings in advance. You're only holding meetings for things you actually need to hold meetings on versus one-on-ones. You're identifying the participants and their roles in the meetings, what they expect to do. You're also talking about what people need to be doing during the meeting, what you're going to address, and then ending your meeting with action items and next steps. Those are some of the brass tacks pieces, but you also want to recreate that sense of the relationships and the rapport that exist in person. Make some time for it. It may not be your favorite thing to do as a manager. Maybe for some, may not for others, but making a space that's comfortable for people to talk about, what shows they're catching up on, how their kids and their family are handling this new environment is an important part of workplace relationships. So when we're doing that, we want to include the water cooler as part of the meetings. And then another piece, the last piece, is thinking about your norms for virtual meetings. It may not be something you want to say multiple times, but we're not checking other email. We're not looking at our phones. We're trying to avoid distractions. We're keeping ourselves on mute if we're not the ones talking, to avoid the background noise. But those pieces will help meetings flow in a way that gets you as close to normal as you can.
You know, I have been on more Zoom conference meetings in the last 5 days, I think, than in the entire 10 years I've been using a virtual conference tool. And it is interesting how quickly people can adapt to those types of norms without even prompting. Within a day, everyone now knows, put myself on mute while somebody else is presenting. But is there a, you mentioned it in the previous slide, and I want to go back to it because I experienced it. So here I am last Monday with my team thinking, all right, we're going to do these do good, better luncheon live streams. In order to have a presenter and myself, we have to do it on Zoom. It took me days. I finally had to bring in my favorite millennial to help me connect Zoom to live stream. And even then on Friday, we had a massive fail. So what are the, you mentioned the obstacles, but what are ways that people can quickly overcome them so that they're not drag on the process and the progress of the team, but also they don't feel isolated and left out?
I love that question.
It's so personal.
It is such an important part of the meeting routine, the communications process, to be able to have your tech needs addressed in advance. So if you know that you'll be running a meeting via Zoom or another platform, whatever it is, you're checking your technology in advance. You're doing not a full run through, but you're identifying what tools do I need on this platform? Are they working? Is everything up to speed? What's my backup plan? There's that, but then also, and I actually really want to remind people about this, is the grace that we offer in when we make a mistake, and hoping that we would be treated that way too. Just acknowledging, taking a deep breath, moving forward. Is a big part. I like in this conversation, the big reminder, folks probably remember, maybe not by name, Professor Robert Kelly, who is a Korea scholar based in Korea, and who is doing a live BBC interview when his kids walked in. That is perfect. The way we felt, the empathy we felt for him is something we want to offer to our colleagues, and know that it didn't end the interview, it didn't end his career, and it gave people a lot more sympathy for the work from home folks.
It's amazing how technology, you would think that technology would distance us, but my experience both on social media, good and bad, but in this way too, is that it almost rips away facade, and you just become much more authentic.
Yeah. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, because our last point is about empathy. It's about active listening. It's about using and bringing your emotional intelligence skills to bear right now. So one of the things that we can do, a quick win for building rapport and strengthening resilience on our teams, is using your active listening skills in communications right now, right away. And it's not complicated, but it does take attention. It takes some focus. And some of your quick win items for active listening are reflecting key points back to people and paraphrasing, asking clarifying questions, using the verbal and nonverbal cues to show you're paying attention, right? You're focused on the call, and withholding judgment, suspending criticism, making a note of the point that you feel is important to make after a person is finished speaking. So that can be a tricky one, but something that is tremendously important for people and teams, is when you're showing respect to your colleagues in that way, they feel it. And really interesting research from Christine Porath at Georgetown's School of Business around how people feel when they're respected by their leadership at work. They're willing to go above and beyond. And right now, that is a crucial element of success, right?
So we have a bunch of questions here. If we have a moment, I'd love to be able to kind of move through them and get back to other pieces here that you might have. One of them is about who leads. So it seems like a big burden. If you have a large team and you've always been used to being the lead in these meetings, in these gatherings, in a conference room, it seems like this can take on a heightened sense of burden to always be the lead. Is there a fluidity that comes with meeting online virtually and managing remote teams that kind of dissipates that leadership across levels that maybe didn't exist before?
I think that it can, and it takes some attention to detail and thinking about how you want to communicate, what goals you're trying to achieve, whether you can delegate, whether you can identify different pieces to make sure that you're continuing the workflows that need to happen. Um, but it does take attention to that detail.
Mm-hmm. And what about external? So we've talked a lot about teams, remote teams, and managing their work. But in nonprofit, we also work with committees and with boards and with constituency groups.
Mm-hmm.
Do the same tips and tools apply there, or is there a nuance to that?
That's a great point. I mean, for people who are thinking about the how do we communicate with those board committees, with external groups that we work closely with, it might be a little bit more of an ask, a request, instead of rolling up sleeves and saying we're doing it this way, say can we approach it this way, what are your would this work for you? Of course you're doing that with your teams too, because you're trying to find the optimal workflows. It might be happening a little faster. But definitely these are approaches that can be applied. You might ask the folks with whom you're working in that external or semi-external capacity whether they've developed approaches that they think work well and want to apply. And you might be able to import some new practices.
That's really interesting, because even in light of this time of uncertainty and where America and the world is on pause, we continue to get requests from nonprofits for help. And just this morning, we were on a presentation for a recruitment contract with a large nonprofit. And I admired that they were moving forward with this opportunity. They were using a new tool I'd never used, Microsoft Teams. I had to learn what it was. So I think my takeaway from this morning was this is a great time for nonprofits in using this kind of remote technology and remote communication and engagement to continue on with some of their work, or to continue on in ways that they maybe didn't get to do while they were doing mission work, being able to spend some time here. Are you seeing that at all?
Am I seeing that right now? I'm seeing a lot of gathering of resources and recalibrating. So I'm seeing, and this is maybe outside of the nonprofit sector, but the pivoting to, what do people need right now? Friends who work in cybersecurity saying, let's make sure all of your remote capacity is up to speed, and for nonprofits, for instance.
That's right.
Addressing intellectual property concerns, and we're seeing pivots there and how people are dealing with it. So yes, those two things are definitely happening at once.
Very interesting. What other tips do you have for us?
So in addition to the ones we talked about earlier, which is your setting and managing expectations, you're creating your tools for communications and for meetings, and then using emotional intelligence. The one thing I want to leave you with is that this is also a good time to understand and examine different work styles that teams have and that individuals have. So an exercise that we do in regular times is to talk about how people like to work and how they work together. So are you, for instance, you can see here a verbal processor versus an internal processor. And if you're like me, one of my first roles, I had a senior partner at the law firm where I was an associate. He used to pop his head in my office and say, I want to talk through something with you. I said, yes, that's the way. I want to do it that way. But someone else may say, I really need to read this document and internalize it first. And knowing how people use those different tools makes a big difference and will help you with that efficiency in communicating. And there's actually, I have an excerpt here from a fabulous article I love in the Harvard Business Review by Sabina Nawaz. You see it at the bottom of the screen. about communicating your work styles and why that's so important. That goes to the question of, what time do we schedule meetings? You know, do I need 4 cups of coffee before I can really communicate? All of these different pieces. That's an important feature of being able to work well with your teams, is knowing who they are and how they like to work.
Regardless of remote, I think that's a great takeaway right there. That is important.
All right. So those are the big things. I mean, I always try to leave time for the questions, the important reminders, like the one here. Experts recommend keeping your daily rituals even when working from home, and you know, making sure that I'm available.
So Audrey, I have a question, and this is more about your insight and opinion or observations. This is very disruptive for so many people and so many organizations, so many companies. I mean, that's an understatement, and everyone knows that. However, I am seeing incidences where this disruption is actually creating something new and different. You know, amongst all the flotsam and jetsam of stuff that's not working, I'm seeing things that are changing. Mm-hmm. What is your expectation after we get through this quarantine and everything settled about the way that this might disrupt, in a good way, organizations, companies, others, in the way that they work together?
I've been thinking about that a lot. And what occurs to me is the need to respect the ability to get your work done how you get it done. So I hear a lot, or I used to hear a lot, about the idea of, you know, FaceTime in the office and being present, working till 8 or 9 o'clock or whatever it is. When I think something beneficial that can come out of this is, like, I'm going to get my work product done for you. I'm going to do it efficiently. And that's going to be part of our success, and that there's more than one way to be successful in an organization. And it's not just being physically present from the hours of 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. to show that how diligent a worker you are, that being able to get that work done in your way is a really important feature of the variety we need to be able to make teams successful.
It's so interesting because I intersect in various ways with the whole tech development side. I'm not an expert, but there are people I know that work there. And the whole idea of agile working is very similar to that, where it's chunked into outcomes and outputs. And you said it at the beginning of this Do Good, Better Luncheon. You said, you know, focus on outcomes and not activity. And when we're in the office together, we're looking to see how active we can be. How can I help? What can I do? But this focus on outcomes and project and those components, this could fundamentally change the way nonprofits operate in the future, I think. And in some ways, I'm a bit of a Pollyanna and always looking for the silver lining, the bright side. But that would be great, you know, if we could, as a nonprofit industry, take away from this the fact that there are other ways to measure our productivity that really have more impact on our mission and our purpose. I think we would have gotten something out of this crisis that is useful. So, well, I so appreciate you doing this. We have had such a great response from experts like you, and you are so generous with your time. And as I said earlier, I hope that we will stay in touch. We are planning on keeping these groups of experts that people have already heard, as well as the next 3 weeks of people that will be speaking every weekday at noon for about 30 minutes on these topics. And I think we're going to do something with this for the industry. And I'm looking forward to that. And again, I thank you for your time.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Sandra.
All right. You have a good time down there in Washington. If you can get out to enjoy the cherry blossoms, I hope that you do. Send us pictures.
Thank you. Will do.
All right. Bye.